Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Hanesbrands, Managing Product Safety to a T. I'm Danielle Iverson, Manager of Government Relations at AAFA. AAFA is the National Trade Association representing apparel, footwear, and other home product companies and their suppliers, which compete in the global market. As the trusted public policy and political voice of the apparel and footwear industry and top resource for continuing education within the industry, AAFA represents 340 member companies and 1,000 name brands within the U.S. apparel and footwear industry. Before we begin today's presentations, I would like to review a few technical aspects. If you are having trouble listening through your computer speakers, please dial in using your telephone. The number is located in the audio section of your control panel. If you are unable to join or having difficulty, please contact GoToWebinar support directly at 1-800-263-6317. All participants will be muted on today's call. If you have a question, please type it into the question box on your control panel. We will try to address all questions during the presentation, but if we can't get to them all, we will follow up via email. Today's webinar will be recorded and available on the AAFA website by the end of the week. A follow-up email containing a copy of the presentation slide deck, a link to the webinar recording, and a short survey on today's webinar will be sent to all participants. Your response is greatly appreciated as your feedback will enable AAFA to continue improving the value of our future webinars. We have a great program lined up today, so let's get started. Today's speakers are Stephanie Lingo and Matt Smith. Stephanie Lingo is the Manager of Product Safety for Hanesbrands since 2000. In addition, she is also currently managing the company's global anti-bribery program. Stephanie is a North Carolina certified paralegal, and previously she had other responsibilities within the legal department at Hanesbrands. Prior to Hanesbrands, she worked at other law firms in North Carolina. She received her associate's degree in paralegal studies from Central Pennsylvania Business School in 1991 and her BS in Business Administration from High Point University in 2000. Matt Smith is the founder and chief strategy officer at ICIX, where he is responsible for cultivating relationships with industry leaders and fueling the vision behind the solution strategy. He is a recognized authority in supply chain risk management and product safety and works with government and advocacy groups to raise awareness about the risks global supply chains represent to brand integrity. Prior to founding ICIX, Matt led sales and service for Megabus, a leading Australia accounting solutions company, and was a professional sailor. Now please join me welcoming our first speaker, Stephanie Lingo.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking time to join this presentation. Next slide, please. Hanesbrands is an apparel manufacturer of innerwear and outerwear. We're headquartered in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We manufacture and sell globally. We are also growing fairly rapidly right now. With our recent acquisition of DB Apparel, we now have a much larger presence in Europe than we've ever had before. And as you can see, some of our brands are shown here on the bottom of this slide. Next slide, please. I want to start out by talking about some challenges that I believe are common to the apparel and footwear industry that most of you that are on the presentation can relate to. First and foremost, we have to protect our brand, and most of us have extended supply chains, and it can be difficult to protect your brand when you do have extended supply chains. We have to maintain the same level of safety and quality with all of our trading partners. We can't put some above others. And it's difficult when you're dealing with those supply chains to have transparency into the network of all of them. As we all know, one negative product incident can cause irreparable harm to your brands. It only takes one recall in some cases. We hear every day on the news here recently of negative impacts to brands with regard to recalls. If you think about the auto industry, it's different than our industry, but in some respects it's still the same. A recall is a recall. And if your company hits the news, it's not just hitting the local news. It could hit, national news. Social media plays such a big role in today's society that it quickly goes all over. So that's one challenge. Another challenge is that the regulations that affect our industry are multiplying and changing and constantly becoming more stringent. And these regulations can vary from country to country and even from state to state within the United States. You look at what California has got with Proposition 65. It varies, from the federal regulations, and then you've got Washington State that has their regulations and various other ones as well. And it's difficult to keep up with all of that. It's difficult not only to keep up with it from a manufacturing standpoint, but even the retailers. With some of the new regulations that come out, they've put some of the onerous back on retailers even. And it's difficult for them, and it's difficult for the suppliers. When you look at CPSIA, even though the manufacturers or the importers of the finished goods are the ones responsible for all the paperwork, you've got, the suppliers are the ones making the buttons or the snaps or whatever the accessory is. So they have a responsibility to make sure that their products don't contain lead, because if they do, then none of us are going to want to buy them to put into our products. The supply chains are also becoming more and more complex and global. And if you don't have sufficient transparency into those supply chains, it's very difficult to know which of your partners are doing what. And it's very important to keep track of that in order to protect your brand. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the public as a whole are now better informed. Social media just absolutely amplifies the visibility and the exposure. And so much information is now available digitally. It's at everybody's fingertips. And it's essential that we as manufacturers and those in our industry, that we become proactive and responsive versus reactive. Next slide, please. I talked about kind of the challenges that we all as an industry face, and then I thought I'd move in now to some of the challenges that Hanesbrands has faced over the last few years. The first thing that we have, has been a big challenge for us is the CPSIA. And I think that's been a big challenge for many people, but for us, it was specifically challenging because we have, after we looked at that law, we looked at how many SKUs we had that we were going to have to create certificates for. And I'll explain, I'll go into a lot more detail about that in a few minutes later in this presentation. But that was a big challenge for us with regard to CPSIA. And then Canada came along with their Consumer Product Safety Act, and that, while it's similar to the U.S., it is a little bit different, so that was a challenge, keeping up with that. And with our recent acquisition of DB Apparel, the need to keep up with a lot of the European regulations is now something that's going to be a challenge for us. We had European presence earlier, but now it's even greater and on a much broader scale. So that's going to be a challenge. We also have a very complex manufacturing base. While we do own a lot of our own manufacturing facilities, we contract out a lot of that. And we have a lot of contract facilities that we use. And those are located in over 30 countries. So we have a pretty extensive supply chain. with all that being said, we have a very limited number of resources dedicated to managing the product safety program. We quickly realized at the onset of the CPSIA that we needed to be able to manage our program with automation. We had to have something that took away a lot of the manual processes, and we had to manage by exception. Otherwise, there was no way we were going to be able to scale the CPSIA. And we also, I'll go into more detail about that in a few minutes. Another challenge we face is that it's difficult when you're growing to be able to incorporate all the new regulations and compliance processes into the program. And in order for us to do that, we have to have a solution for managing the program across all of our supply base. Next slide, please. With all of this, it is extremely important that you have executive support and buy-in. You have to manage this from the top down. And product safety really needs to be a part of your culture. If you make it part of your culture, it makes it easier to get your buy-in. And one way that you can get executive support is to make them understand how critical product safety is to protecting your customers, the consumers, and your brand. We've talked already about brands and how important they are to the life of a company. You have to have a comprehensive program to effectively manage it across all your supply chain. You also have to have a proactive approach to addressing and anticipating the requirements and mitigating the risk throughout your supply chain. Not only do you have to protect the public by having safe products, but you have to protect the company and your brands. You have to avoid those recalls. Think about what I said earlier about all the things that are on the news right now. Recalls are expensive. Not only do they just damage the name of your brand names from a social perspective, but they're expensive. Recalls cost a lot of money, and that hurts your bottom line sales. And if your executive team can understand all of that, then it helps get their buy-in when they realize the impact of something like that. Another key piece to make your executive team understand is that a lot of these regulations are not just voluntary. They are legal requirements. They're laws. And if you are not in compliance with them, then there's going to be significant consequences. The criminal and civil fines that are associated with a lot of the noncompliance regarding specifically CPSIA has gone up since the onset of that CPSIA in 2008. The fines are much more significant now. And if you have an inefficient process for managing all that you have to manage as part of your program, then the non-compliance is going to increase your time to market. It's going to take, for instance, let me just give you a quick example. If you have a shipment that needed to have lead testing and your lead testing is not available, and the customs stops your shipment, there's all kinds of consequences. There's fines. They can seize the goods, and if they seize your goods, then your goods aren't going to make it to your customer, and then you're going to have all kinds of fallout with regard to your customers. And the larger your business is, the more you have to keep track of, and the harder it is. So even for a small business, it's difficult, but for a larger business, it's even more difficult because you just have more to keep track of. So it's really important to have a centralized solution that streamlines all of this for you. It helps to have visibility and control over all of your trading partners and all of your products. It helps you focus all of your internal resources and manage by exception. And it gives you a more holistic view and high-level view of all of your trading partners and your products. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Matt Smith at ICIX to talk about leveraging technology.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that introduction, and the AAFA for hosting this webinar for us. I've been looking forward to it. So next slide, please. So what I wanted to touch on was sort of some key learnings that we've had as a technology partner to a lot of companies out there, and pass it on to the audience here and talk about some big buckets and best practices and thought leadership that we've seen across verticals. And it's interesting as we get across verticals how common this is, as Stephanie was indicating with GM. It's still just a product that gets recalled, and if you drive it or you wear it or you eat it, it's got a lot of similar characteristics. But one that's very critical and the foundation of success is what we look at as transparency, and Stephanie talked and alluded to it a couple of times about that extended supply chain. We know it's complicated, it's grown for various reasons, often cost-driven throughout various countries to all corners of the globe. But it's fundamental to have it. If you don't have the transparency, if you don't know where or who you're doing business with and the products that come out of those relationships, then it's very, very, very difficult to be successful in this endeavor of supply chain risk management. And so if we look at that, then when we understand transparency, we look at the next block, and that's the product data integrity, the protect your data integrity, sorry. And so if you're using technology and ultimately using technologies to make business or better, faster decisions using that technology, you want to make sure that your data sources are accurate and leverage and protect those. So, whether they're internal data sources that you need to leverage or your service providers like your labs or your inspection companies, you want to make sure that you're protecting that and making sure that you can make those correct business decisions. As you're going about and putting these initiatives into place, you want to establish processes that are repeatable, scalable, accurate, and measurable. And measurable is a really key one there. This is a journey. It's not a snapshot, get technology in and solve the problem. You want to continuously improve. There's always going to be improvements in business processes, and so making it measurable is key there as well to ensure that you're heading in the right direction with your processes. All of this should help for you to lead to identifying risks in real time. As near as real time, I guess, is probably a better term. So you can start to identify those risks, and risk can take on many different identities, both product and partner risks that you would look at, potentially, geopolitical, supply chain continuity risk, all the stuff that can start to affect your brand and quality and safety of your products. And with all of these putting together, you want to start then enabling your technologies to help you allocate resources in a smart and efficient way. I don't think I've met anyone in the industry that wants to sit down and read an 80-page test report or an audit. That's not really a good use of people's time. You want to be starting to be using that information and the data you're gathering through your processes to really start to make better decisions around the products as you bring them to market, hopefully get them to market faster and safer with better quality and having sustainable relationships throughout your extended supply chain. So there's some sort of really key elements you want to look at as you're looking for technology solutions to help you to implement your initiatives. Next slide, please. And so wanted to also then put in some best practices. As I said, we've been across multiple verticals, but there's some very common characteristics or elements that we've seen in effective programs across verticals. And the first one is automate. You want to remove as many manual activities as you can, and really try not to, I know this is difficult for some, but try not to take your current manual processes and convert them into a software solution. You want to use software technology and your technology partners out there to help you make better decisions and better process, streamline those processes. Ultimately, that's the concept of technology, right, to make things easier. So, avoid that automating and streamlining by just replicating older processes. And of course, always try and manage by exception. And again, we've never have endless amounts of human resources to help solve these problems. So you want to make sure you can, focus those internal resources in the right arenas. Ultimately, you want to consolidate information into a platform, gathering different elements together, whether that's consolidating through one platform or consolidating a numerous software applications to give you an output. You want to make sure that you can associate that data you're collecting and gain a holistic view. And as I said, there's many different elements or lenses of risk that you want to start to look at. And if you can do that in a consolidated platform, it's going to make everyone's life easier internally and probably externally with your trading partners as well. Collaborate with your active network, making sure you're focusing on current relationships you have. It's a difficult process, we understand that, but you don't want to be gathering data. You don't want to gather from products that are at end of life cycle or trading partners that you no longer do business with. That's very difficult, and we see a lot of manual processes sort of managing this big spreadsheets to try and do that. So try and really focus your activity on current and up-to-date trading partners and events that are going on between those. Advanced flexible reporting and analytics. One thing we've found for sure is that everyone wants a different view, whether you're at the C level, the executive level of an organization, whether you're managing the processes yourself or you're somewhere in between those sort of levels. Everyone's going to have a different view or want to have a different lens or cut and divide their data, and divide their data the way they want to look at it. So make sure that when you're looking at that, you want to understand the data you're collecting. Never collect data that you're never going to use. That's a waste of everyone's time. But make sure when you've collected that data, you have the ability to make it flexible in the way you want to analyze it and visualize it. Allow a solution that is simplified in sharing. And again, we're getting, a lot of the technology we see on the consumer worlds have made, great advances in simplifying how objects are shared, whether that's photos or conversations as we see out there. But you want to make sure that the ability to share and access this data is as easy as possible, and being centralized is often a very good way to do that. Instantly share the information, make it available. No one wants to chase documents, and no one wants to, look to how I'm going to, chase a piece of paper to give to a customer. That's just, is a waste of everyone's time. Another big best practice, and probably underlines all of this, is executive buy-in and the corporate culture. It's got to be from the top down. It's got to be, and a lot of people on this phone, it's your mission really to evangelize how important, supply chain risk management, transparency, visibility around safety and quality and all the other components that now come with that umbrella are at the top level, and it's got to start to bleed down. And really successful programs have always had executive leadership or championships, or even better, part of the DNA, value, and culture of the company. And if you can get that message of how important this is to protect the brand, which is often the biggest piece of IP a company will own, it's critical to get that messaging and belief and passion behind it. Also, this is, again, that is also leveraging in other information you want to gather and share as well. So once you get these platforms and centralized, it's sharing of everything. So it's a key portion. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of championing that you'll have to do. But I think if you look at a lot of these best practices that we'll learn over time, it's going to help your cause. Next slide, please. All right, so now this is particular back to Hanesbrands and our experiences with these guys, and they've been very much a thought leader. We were introduced to Hanes, wow, it's probably 6 or 7 years ago, through mutual relationships we had in business. The Hanesbrands objectives for the solutions they needed, we're trying to put these in to the big bucket, so this hopefully helps you in your endeavors internally as well, was consolidate the supply chain and safety of activities on one platform. A lot of sort of ad hoc messaging, communication, requests of information throughout various departments within Hanes, often to the same trading partner, same person at that trading partner, but in different ways, formats, processes, was really inefficient both for Hanesbrands, but they really understood how inefficient it was on the other side of that equation as well. I don't want to tag them as geeks, but they are very much early adopters and love technology and wanted to leverage advanced technology. They were very proactive right across their organization on utilizing technology. So I put that as a thought leader to embrace technology on how it can assist and drive their company and really be a differentiator for them as an organization. Really understood the importance of gathering and reporting real-time data and getting their hands on that. Just through the nature of the beast of Hanesbrands, lots of acquisitions, mergers, spin-offs, etc., had just a eclectic gathering of technologies, but understood that getting and gathering that data, it was very, very important for them to be successful as well. Really looking to the future as well, so anticipating future regulations, where's this going to go, how's this going to go, not just sort of solving, being reactional in nature, but being prepared for the future. How are they going to do this? How, what's coming up next? Where do they anticipate? How do you model your businesses out for that, prepare your business for that, communicate that out to your trading partners? So when the changes are coming, it's understood and clearly articulated and prepared for. Another big one was the simplifying and enabling the sharing and storage of business critical information. Internally, probably selfishly for Hanes is what they were looking for to be effective there, but realized, they have many people and companies that they rely on to be a successful business. So understanding the simplifying and sharing information across the spectrum of trading partners was very, very critical to being successful as well. And really, again, starting to level the bar of the standard of the product safety programs. And as we probably have all witnessed, product safety programs have really blossomed into many other, supply chain risks as we look at it. But product safety is a core to your supply chain risk initiatives. So looking to see how we can increase those standards and bring other initiatives you have within an organization up to those standards as well. And that's really sort of the 6 big buckets we looked at Hanes as a thought leader. So I'm going to pass it on back to Stephanie to continue on. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit now about how we're actually managing all of this using technology. As Matt mentioned, we had partnered with ICIX several years ago through a mutual company that was already using them, and they're one of our customers, so that's how we found out about ICIX. And it was about the time that CPSIA was coming into play and had been announced. And like everybody else, we panicked and said, oh my goodness, this is huge. What are we going to do? How are we going to manage all of this given the amount of product we have, the locations of this product globally, the fact that we had a very complex supply chain. Some of it was factories that we owned, some of it wasn't. It was contractors. Some contractors doing a small amount, some doing a big amount, etc. And so we were looking for some sort of technology solution to help us manage it all. So what we realized quickly was that we needed something that could take data that we had housed in multiple systems already and centralize it into one platform. And we had to do that and then take that information and be able to automate everything that we needed it to spit out on the other end. And specifically talking about CPSIA, what we needed the end product to be was a certificate of compliance or a general conformity certificate for our finished products. And we also had to figure out a way to share that with customs and or CPSC and or our customers, as was required by CPSIA, at the appropriate times. And we quickly realized also, as I mentioned before, that we needed to figure out a way to manage all of this by exception and automate all of it. We also figured out that we needed something that would provide us a single point of reference and access, as I mentioned earlier. We needed something also, as we were looking at CPSIA, we thought, okay, well, what else is going to be coming along that could potentially throw us for a loop? So we sat down and started thinking about it, and we said, all right, we don't know exactly what's coming down the pike, but whatever solution we choose, we had to figure out a way that it could be structured so we could add new requirements. If new requirements came in, we could quickly adapt those. And if we needed to add different data fields because the new regulation required something that CPSIA didn't, we needed to be able to adapt for that. And we needed to be able to not just have a COC or a GCC, but if there was some other type of document that we were going to have to produce, that we would be able to do that, or that we would be able to share it. We also needed a solution that was going to give us kind of an at-a-glance view of compliance, and specifically compliance of our manufacturing facilities, those that were making the product that we had to create our certificates for. We had to figure out, you know, okay, we've got to be able to see all of them at the same time. We've got to be able to see which product's compliant, which product's not, at a point in time at which we could address it before it was imported, because that's the trigger for CPSIA and the certificates. You have to have your certificate generated and ready before your products are imported. So we had to be able to have a holistic view of all of that so that we could make sure that nothing was being imported that didn't have the appropriate tests and certificates. And we, you know, what you measure gets done is a, you know, a famous saying that everybody uses. And we needed to be able to measure what our vendors were doing for us, what our facilities were doing, so that we could enforce these regulations and have a way to say, okay, facility A has consistently not done everything they need to do before it's time to ship, and our shipments are being delayed because we're waiting on them to produce something or to submit samples for testing or whatever. So it's given us, we needed some way to see where the issues were across the board. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the workflow that we've got set up, how we've automated things to give you guys a better understanding of all of this. We have a system in place now with ICIX where we take all of those files that I was talking about that are in multiple systems here, and we compile them and put them in ICIX every day. And it includes things like shipping records, product information, test data, and some other information. And if you look at the slide, step one is your trigger. Our shipping manifests are what triggers, when they're created, that's what triggers everything in our system. You may have a different trigger, depending on how your your manufacturing is set up, you might trigger it at the issuance of the POs, or I don't know. There could be so many different triggers. Whatever works for you, but you have to have a trigger to set the whole thing in motion. So our trigger is the shipping manifest, and once our shipping manifest hit the system, then there's all this criteria that is set, and the system goes and looks for all the data, and if it meets the criteria that has been set, it will automatically generate a certificate. If it doesn't meet the criteria that has been set, an exception report is generated. And that is the key to how we manage all of this, because we manage by exception. We take those reports that we get, and we go and we address the issues. And once we address the issues, it again becomes an automatic issuance, because the system will see, okay, now I see that piece of data that I needed, and I can generate the certificate. The certificates, once they're generated, are automatically sent to a website where they're available to the government or customs or our customers, anybody that needs them, as is dictated by CPSIA. And they're all done and completed and available before the products are imported into the U.S., because that's another key element of the CPSIA law. We had to figure out a way to get all of this done before the importation process. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you kind of a snapshot of the scale of what we were facing and how we took that, and by automating it through a system, we're able to manage this program. When we first looked at the CPSIA, the proposed laws, and what we were going to be required to do, we took a look at our product base, and we quickly realized that based on our products and what was going to be required, that we had to do something at the SKU level versus the style level. Our SKUs, each SKU represents a style, color, attribute, and size. So if you've got style 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's available in 25 colors, and each color has a back neck heat transfer label, and it has a brand logo on the front. Because of the different array of colors, you may have a white heat transfer, a black heat transfer, and a gray heat transfer for the back neck label. And you might have a fourth different color because you might have a reflective logo on the front on all of them that's the same. One lead test isn't going to necessarily cover all colors in that case, because you have to do different lead tests for each one of those colors. So that's why we decided we had to do everything at the SKU level. So that right there increased the complexity of everything. Then we started looking at our manifest, because that was our trigger. And just this, what you see up here, is just it's a snapshot of 1 week of data. And the 1 week that we chose, we had the minimum number of manifests we had was 1,000. The maximum was about 12,000 per day in that week. And when you look at a manifest, your manifest can actually contain 1 SKU or over 100. It just varies on what the PO was, what the facility had ready that day or that week, based on the PO, etc. And then when you take all of that data and you look, we looked at our stuff, we basically had a minimum of about 29,000 shipments sent out every month. And by shipments, I mean manifests. So we had about a minimum of 29,000 manifests a month. And when you look at that scale and you start figuring, I've got to create, even if I had, 1,000 manifests on a day and there was just one SKU on each manifest, how long is it going to take me to manually create all of those certificates? And when we started, back to the executive support, when we started explaining this to our executive team, it became very clear to them even that we had to automate this process or add significant number of headcount. And, adding headcount in a corporation is a difficult thing to do. It's almost more difficult to get approval to add headcount than it is to have a system that's going to manage something for you. So we showed this type of data to the executive team and said, we've got to have a solution, and they agreed. So by doing that, it allows you to reallocate your resources to focus more on the value-added work and take it away from pushing paper and managing data and information. So when you're looking at these type of numbers, it's pretty clear the significance of that. Next slide, please. This slide gives you it goes into more of what I was just saying, and it just kind of gives you some numbers to look at. I don't want to bore you with them, but just to give you kind of another snapshot, this first one, efficiency increased by 750%. Basically, if you looked at a day when you had just say you had 922 manifests with a total of 922 SKUs, which would be one per manifest. And it only took you 1 minute to create a certificate, which we all know it takes more than a minute to create a manual certificate. But even if it just took you 1 minute, it would take you 15 hours to manually create those certificates. There's just no way that you could do 15 hours a day. You'd have to have more than one person. At a minimum, you'd need 2. More than that, because you have other responsibilities as well. And so when you manage it by exception, like we do, you can kind of reduce that 15 hours a day to 1 or 2 hours a day, sometimes a little more, but because now you're just managing the exceptions and going after the ones that, oh, the lead test is missing, or we don't have that SKU in the system and we've got to just double check what happened with the pulls, things like that. So it makes it a lot easier. It'll also, it improves your resource allocation, like I was talking about a few minutes ago. You can take your resources, the few that you have, and use those for more important things than pushing paper. And it reduces your manual enforcement processes. So those vendors that are continually getting ready to ship, but they don't have their lead test results yet, it gives you visibility to that and quick visibility to that, and it allows you to show your executive team, hey, this vendor is consistently trying to get everything ready in advance of having their lead test when they should be doing the lead test first, or whatever the case may be, whatever your internal processes are, it helps you ensure that your vendors are complying with those internal processes. Next slide, please. I'm going to, oh, I'm sorry, this is my slide, excuse me. So some of the things that are next that I foresee the future being is that regulations are going to continue to change. New regulations are going to continue to come into existence. It just seems like every time we turn around, there's some new and great change they want to make to CPSIA, or some other country comes along and is going to change or create a product safety program, or they're going to come up with some new chemical regulations or a new restricted substance list or something like that. You know, a perfect example of that is the Commission's proposed changes to the 1110 rule regarding electronic filing. I know there's some other changes in there, but the electronic filing specifically hits home with me because, you know, we've already got this technological solution, so I'm hoping that depending on what they're going to do, we'll be in good shape. But for, you know, for people who are still doing it via paper, it may be more alarming as to what's coming. You know, I feel confident that fines for noncompliance will continue to increase, and they're going to continue to enforce those. We've already seen increases in fines since CPSIA came along, and they've been pretty significant. Consumers and customers, I think, are going to continue to demand even more. We've already talked about, you know, social media and how things can go viral quickly. I think that's just going to continue to grow and grow and grow. And I think that in order for companies to continue to keep up with all this, we're going to have to use technology to assist us, because we just can't manage it all manually anymore. Even, you know, communication with our vendors, you know, communication with our customers. We have to be able to, you know, truly have transparency in our supply chains and be able to see what our partners are doing. We have to be able to effectively monitor and manage those relationships. And in order to do that and optimize our resources and our productivity, we have to automate in order to effectively do that. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn this back over to Danielle for the Q&A session.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. So now we'll open up the floor for questions. Those of you listening in today can submit questions through the question box located on the right side of your screen. As a reminder, if we do not get to your question today, we will address any remaining questions individually via email. Let's take a look at the questions. Okay, the first question we've received, and I'll open it up to either Stephanie or Matt. Have you used this product safety program to integrate acquired companies?
This is Stephanie. I'll go ahead and address that one. We actually have. We've had the Maidenform acquisition earlier this year, and just recently our DB Apparel acquisition. And by having the online tool with ICIX, we've been able to, the integration's been very smooth with regard to product safety, because we've just simply been able to add the manufacturing facilities into the system, and we've been able to communicate to those facilities what our requirements are and train them on what they needed to do to comply with our requirements. So it's actually been very easy to do that part of it.
Okay. Thanks. We have another question. And how difficult was it to get buy-in on the business case for this solution?
I think they're talking about the executive buy-in on that, and it was really easy. As I explained during the presentation, once our team saw just how many man-hours it was going to take to manage the certificates and all of the requirements, it was very apparent to them that we could not do it without either adding a lot of headcount or getting a technological solution. And it was very easy when you started doing the math that it was easier to do it with a technological solution. Not only was it less expensive to do it that way, but you have less room for error, and you have more of a holistic view of everything. And I'm able to give them reports, with a few clicks of a button, a few clicks on the computer. And it was a lot. There was a lot of advantages to having a system versus adding headcount.
Great. We'll take the next question. Did the increase in supply chain transparency deliver any surprising insights?
Yeah. The true areas of risk that we were facing, I think what we thought they might be in the beginning, we didn't realize that, the depth of what they could be until we actually had the system, because now we had a holistic view of what was there and exactly what they were doing, because it was a real-time view. It wasn't waiting for something to trickle down and hit my desk. We actually had a real-time view of what was going on, and multiple people within our organization could see it at the same time. So it made communication a lot easier. I think, Matt, I think this might be a good one for you to address too, because you've got a lot of customers, and you've probably got a broader sense of what others are seeing.
Yeah, and I'll go back to earlier points that we were talking about, and that is, the transparency is just critical. You don't know what you don't know. If you've got no data on your trading partners or the products that are being provided to you through that network, it's very, very hard to understand where that is, and it's very subjective at best. So getting that transparency and giving you the visibility into where issues may lie that you can control or potentially are out of your control is critical to start to mitigate and prepare against it. So yeah, it's common. I mean, look, most companies we deal with are in a very bad state to start with. They have zero transparency, and that's one of the first things we'll tackle with them.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. So how has this solution changed, Stephanie, how you choose long-term trading partners or Hanesbrands?
It gives us better insight into those partners that are, those vendors that are more partners with us. It allows us to see who's being compliant quicker, and obviously those vendors who are willing to work with us and not fight against us are going to be the ones that we're able to have longer-term relationships with, and it gives us quite a bit of visibility. And as I said earlier, we can run reports to show management which vendors, how they're performing. It basically gives us a dashboard to look at that from various aspects. So it's given us a lot of great insight into what's happening in our supply chain.
Well, thank you, Stephanie and Matt. So it looks like we've come to the end of our webinar, and I want to thank you both for providing us with such valuable information, and I'd like to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. As a reminder, this webinar will be available on the AAFA website within 48 hours. You will receive a follow-up email containing links to the webinar recording and presentation slide deck, and please don't forget to fill out our webinar survey. Additionally, if you have submitted a question that we did not have a chance to address during the webinar, your question will be answered via email by one of today's presenters. To learn more about the topics discussed in today's webinar, please visit AAFA's website at www.wewear.org and ICIX at www.icix, that's ICIX, ICIX.com, and feel free to reach out to today's speakers via email with any additional questions you may have. Thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your attendance.
Thank you.